Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Betrayal. Vincent Cross stood in his penthouse office overlooking the Chicago skyline, his reflection barely visible in the floor-to-ceiling windows. At 42, his salt and pepper hair and steel gray eyes gave him an air of authority that had been earned through 20 years of building an empire most people never saw. To the world, he was a successful security consultant. In reality, he was the architect of one of the most sophisticated information networks in the Midwest. 3 years ago, his world had shattered in the most predictable way possible. "I'm taking Ryan. I'm taking half of everything," Claudia had declared that October evening, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the divorce papers. "My lawyer says I'm entitled to it after 15 years of marriage." What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that Vincent Cross had spent those 15 years building something far more valuable than the suburban mansion and visible assets she was claiming. While she'd been playing tennis at the country club and organizing charity galas, he'd been cultivating relationships with people who traded in secrets, favors, and power. The divorce had been swift and brutal. Claudia had hired Harrison and Associates, the most aggressive firm in the city, led by a shark named Patricia Harrison, who specialized in destroying wealthy men. Vincent had sat through the proceedings with the patience of a predator, letting them think they were winning. "Your client seems remarkably calm for someone about to lose millions," Patricia had whispered to Vincent's deliberately mediocre attorney during one of the settlement hearings. If only she'd known that Vincent was already 3 moves ahead. The real blow had come when Ryan, his 16-year-old son, had chosen to live with his mother. The boy Vincent had taught to play chess, to think strategically, to never show weakness, had looked him in the eye and said, "Mom says you care more about work than family. I think she's right." That night, Vincent had made a decision that would reshape everything. He would give them what they wanted, distance, but he would also give them something they hadn't asked for, a lesson in what happens when you cross Vincent Cross. The plan had taken 3 years to mature. During that time, Claudia had moved into a new life with Tyler Webb, a smooth-talking real estate developer she'd met at one of her charity events. Tyler was everything Vincent wasn't: flashy, social, and completely convinced of his own charm. What Tyler didn't realize was that every property deal he'd closed in the past 2 years had been carefully orchestrated by Vincent's network. Vincent had been feeding Tyler opportunities, creating artificial market conditions, and slowly building Tyler's ego and dependency on deals that seemed too good to be true. Because they were. Ryan, now 19 and about to graduate from Northwestern with a degree in business, had grown distant. Their monthly dinners had become formal affairs where the boy, now a young man, spoke about his mother's happiness and Tyler's amazing business success with barely concealed disdain for his father's boring consulting work. Vincent let him believe it. The graduation ceremony was tomorrow, and Vincent had received his invitation like any other divorced parent. Formal, cold, with specific instructions about seating arrangements. Claudia had made it clear through her attorney that while Vincent was welcome to attend, he should maintain appropriate boundaries. Standing in his office now, Vincent opened a secure tablet and reviewed the final pieces of his 3-year masterpiece. Tomorrow wouldn't just be Ryan's graduation. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end for everyone who had betrayed him. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Delacroix, his closest associate and the only person who knew the full scope of Vincent's capabilities. "Everything's in position. Are you sure you want to do this at the boys' graduation?" Vincent typed back without hesitation. "They chose the venue. I'm just providing the entertainment." He walked to his safe and withdrew a simple silver phone, one of 12 identical devices that connected him to people whose names never appeared in any directory. This particular phone connected him to Judge Angela Romano, who owed Vincent more favors than she could repay in a lifetime. Tomorrow, Claudia and Tyler would learn that some betrayals have consequences that echo for years. And Ryan would learn that his father wasn't the weak man he'd been led to believe. Vincent poured himself a scotch and watched the city lights flicker like stars. In 18 hours, the Real Vincent Cross would finally step out of the shadows. Chapter 2. The stage is set. The Northwestern University graduation ceremony was a picture of affluent perfection. Families clustered in designer clothes under the June sun, their conversations mixing pride with barely concealed competition about their children's future prospects. Vincent arrived precisely 15 minutes before the ceremony began, wearing a simple charcoal suit that cost more than most people's cars, but looked completely unremarkable. He spotted Claudia immediately. She'd positioned herself in the third row, center section, surrounded by what looked like a small army of her social circle. Tyler sat beside her, his arm draped possessively across her shoulders, his gaudy gold watch catching the sunlight like a beacon of nouveau riche desperation. Vincent chose a seat in the back, exactly where a properly marginalized ex-husband should sit. Vincent, the voice belonged to Jennifer Walsh, one of Claudia's tennis partners. I didn't expect to see you here. Claudia mentioned you'd been distant from Ryan lately. Vincent smiled the practice smile he'd perfected over years of staying invisible. Wouldn't miss my son's graduation. How's the real estate market treating you and David? Jennifer's face brightened. Actually fantastic. We just closed on that new development in Winnetka. Tyler Webb found us the most amazing property, way below market value. The seller was desperate. Can you believe it? Vincent could believe it, since he'd arranged for the seller's company to face a sudden cash flow crisis that made the sale necessary. But he simply nodded and said, Tyler seems to have a gift for finding opportunities. He really does. Claudia is so lucky. I mean, after your divorce, we all worried about her, but Tyler has been amazing. Such a provider. Vincent let the barb land without reaction. I'm happy she's found someone who makes her feel secure. As Jennifer walked away, Vincent's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from his network. Everything was proceeding on schedule. Tyler's latest miracle deal, a massive commercial development project, was about to hit its first major snag. The environmental impact report that had been mysteriously delayed for 6 months was ready to be filed. Today, the ceremony began with the usual pomp and circumstance. Vincent watched Ryan cross the stage, tall and confident, shaking hands with the dean. For a moment, genuine pride cut through his carefully constructed armor. Whatever else had happened, Ryan was his son, and this was his achievement. But when Ryan found Claudia and Tyler in the crowd, when his face lit up and he pointed directly at them, while completely ignoring the back section where Vincent sat, that moment of softness crystallized back into cold purpose. The ceremony ended with the traditional cap toss, and families began flowing toward the reception area. Vincent was making his way through the crowd when he heard Claudia's voice, sharp with authority. Excuse me, officer. I need to speak with security about seating arrangements for the family reception. Vincent turned to see his ex-wife approaching a campus security guard, her face set in the expression he remembered from their worst fights. Righteous indignation mixed with absolute certainty that she was in the right. Ma'am, is there a problem? The security guard, a heavy-set man in his 50s, looked genuinely confused. That man, Claudia pointed directly at Vincent, is my ex-husband. He's not welcome in the family section of the reception. I've already spoken to the event coordinator about this, but I wanted to make sure security was aware. Vincent felt the familiar calm descend over him. The same feeling he got when a chess opponent made exactly the move he'd been hoping for. He walked toward them, not hurrying, his face showing nothing but mild confusion. Is there an issue? He asked the security guard directly, ignoring Claudia completely. Sir, this lady says. This loser abandoned us for work, Claudia interrupted, her voice carrying clearly across the crowd. Several nearby families turned to watch the unfolding drama. He chose his precious consulting business over his family, and now he thinks he can just waltz in here and pretend to be father of the year. He's not welcome here. Tyler stepped up beside her, his chest puffed out in a display of protective masculinity that might have been impressive if Vincent hadn't known exactly how leveraged and desperate the man was behind his confident facade. You heard the lady, pal. Family only. Vincent looked at the security guard, who was clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Then he looked at Tyler, really looked at him, letting a hint of the predator show through the mask for just a moment. Tyler actually took a half step back. I understand there's been a misunderstanding, Vincent said quietly. Then he pulled out his silver phone. The crowd around them was growing. Vincent could see Ryan pushing through, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Perfect. Vincent made one phone call. He spoke only 4 words. Romano. Northwestern. Now. Full. He hung up and slipped the phone back into his pocket. What was that supposed to prove? Claudia demanded. Security, I want this man removed from. Mrs. Morrison. The new voice belonged to Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, Northwestern's Dean of Students, who had appeared beside the security guard with the speed of someone responding to an urgent summons. I'm so sorry for any confusion. If you could give us just a moment to sort this out. Dr. Hawthorne looked directly at Vincent, and he could see the exact moment she recognized him. Not as Vincent Cross, the consulting businessman, but as Vincent Cross, whose name appeared on certain very exclusive donor lists and whose recommendations carried weight in academic circles she desperately wanted to be part of. Dad! Ryan had finally reached them, his graduation cap clutched in his hand. What's going on? Your mother was just explaining seating arrangements, Vincent said calmly. I was about to leave anyway. I got what I came for. That's when they heard the sirens. Chapter 3. The phone call's power. The sirens grew louder, and Vincent watched as 3 police cars pulled up to the main campus entrance. Behind them came 2 black SUVs that made Tyler Webb's face go pale in a way that confirmed Vincent's intelligence about the man's past encounters with federal authorities. Vincent Cross. The voice belonged to Principal Diana Foster, who had appeared at Vincent's elbow with the kind of speed that suggested she'd been running. Her face was flushed, and there was genuine panic in her eyes. Sir, I had no idea who you were. Please forgive the misunderstanding. The words cut through the crowd's murmur like a blade. Claudia's mouth fell open, and Vincent could see the exact moment she realized that the quiet, defeated ex-husband she'd been publicly humiliating might not be exactly who she thought he was. Who he is. Tyler stepped forward, his gold watch catching the light as he gestured dismissively. Lady, this is just Vincent. He sells security systems or something. There's no misunderstanding here. Dr. Hawthorne and Principal Foster exchanged a look that made Tyler's confidence waver. Mr. Webb, Dr. Hawthorne said carefully, I think perhaps you should. Vincent Cross. A new voice interrupted, and everyone turned to see Detective Frank Morrison, no relation to Claudia, despite the name, approaching their group. He was followed by 2 uniformed officers and a woman in a plain black suit whose bearing screamed federal agent. Vincent stepped forward slightly. Detective Morrison, I wasn't expecting to see you here. Sir, we received word you might need assistance with a situation. The detective's respectful tone caused another ripple of confusion through the watching crowd. Ryan was staring at his father like he'd never seen him before. Dad, what's going on? Who are these people? Before Vincent could answer, the woman in the black suit stepped forward. Agent Patricia Romano, FBI Liaison Office. Mr. Cross, the call came through Judge Romano's office. She said you might require federal assistance with a harassment situation. The blood drained from Claudia's face. Federal? Vincent, what the hell? Ma'am, Agent Romano's voice was crisp with authority. I'm going to need you to step back and lower your voice. Mr. Cross, would you like to file a formal complaint regarding the harassment you've experienced here? Vincent let the moment stretch, watching as Tyler's bravado crumbled and Claudia's world visibly shifted on its axis. The crowd of graduation families had formed a rough circle around them, no longer trying to pretend they weren't watching every second of the drama. That won't be necessary, Vincent said finally. I think there's simply been a misunderstanding about my background. Agent Romano, perhaps you could clarify for everyone who called in the request for assistance. The request came through federal judge Angela Romano's chambers. The judge indicated that any harassment of Vincent Cross should be treated as a priority matter. Tyler's face had gone from pale to green. Federal judge? Vincent, you never said you knew any federal judges. Mr. Webb. Vincent's voice carried a tone Tyler had never heard before. The voice of a man who had just stopped pretending to be harmless. There are a lot of things about me that never came up in casual conversation. For instance, did you know I'm familiar with your development project in Oak Brook? The one with the environmental impact report that was filed this morning. Tyler's expression went from confusion to horror in seconds. How do you? That report wasn't supposed to be filed until after you closed your financing and sold the pre-construction units? Vincent's smile was winter cold. Yes, I'm aware of the timeline you were hoping for. Unfortunately, environmental law doesn't pause for convenient financing schedules. Claudia was looking back and forth between them, clearly trying to process what she was hearing. Vincent, I don't understand. You're a security consultant. You sell alarm systems to small businesses. Actually, Mrs. Morrison, Dr. Hawthorne interjected, Mr. Cross is one of our most significant benefactors. The Cross Center for Strategic Studies was endowed by his foundation. Perhaps you're not aware of your ex-husband's full portfolio? Vincent watched Ryan's face as the pieces began clicking into place. His son was intelligent. He was starting to realize that the father he dismissed as a workaholic failure might be something else entirely. The Cross Foundation? Ryan's voice was quiet. Dad, the Cross Foundation sponsors half the business seminars at school. They partner with the federal government on security research. The founder would have to be extremely wealthy and well-connected, Vincent finished. Yes. The silence that followed was broken by Agent Romano's radio crackling to life. She listened to the transmission, then looked at Vincent with something approaching amusement. Mr. Cross, we just received word that the SEC will be opening an investigation into several real estate development projects in the northern suburbs. Your name came up as a potential witness. Tyler staggered backward like he'd been hit. SEC? Vincent, what did you do? I made some phone calls, Vincent said simply. Amazing what happens when you know the right people and have documentation of certain irregularities in financing disclosures. Claudia found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Vincent, we need to talk. Privately. I don't think so. Vincent's voice was final. You made your choices 3 years ago. You chose to believe I was weak. You chose to take our son and teach him to see me as a failure. You chose to publicly humiliate me today because you thought I was powerless to respond. He stepped closer to her, his voice dropping so only she could hear. You forgot that I taught you how to play chess, Claudia. I taught you to think several moves ahead. But you never learned the most important lesson. Never attack an opponent until you're certain you understand what they're capable of. Vincent turned to Agent Romano. Thank you for your quick response. I think the situation is resolved. As the law enforcement officials began to disperse, Vincent looked at his son one last time. Ryan's face was a mix of shock, confusion, and something that might have been the beginning of respect. Ryan, Vincent said quietly, when you're ready to have an adult conversation about family loyalty and what it really means to choose sides, you know how to reach me. He turned and walked away, leaving behind a family in ruins and a crowd of witnesses who would spend years trying to understand what they'd just seen. Behind him, he heard Tyler's voice, desperate and breaking. Claudia, we need to call my lawyer. We need to call everyone. Vincent just destroyed everything. Vincent smiled as he reached his car. The game was just beginning. Chapter 4. The Network Unveiled. Vincent's penthouse office felt different that evening. For 3 years, it had been his war room, a place where he'd planned and schemed in shadow. Now, with his cover blown, it felt like what it had always been, the command center of one of the most sophisticated private intelligence networks in North America. Marcus Delacroix was waiting for him, feet up on the conference table, reading through a stack of files with the casual efficiency of a man who traded in secrets for a living. At 38, Marcus was everything Vincent wasn't. Charismatic, charming, and able to make friends with dangerous people who saw Vincent as too calculating to trust completely. Well, Marcus said without looking up, that was subtle. Subtlety was never the point. Vincent poured 2 glasses of scotch and handed one to his oldest friend. How much damage? To us? None. Your cover as boring security consultant is blown, but we've been preparing for that eventuality for months. Marcus accepted the drink and finally looked up from the files. To them, Tyler Webb is finished. The SEC investigation is real. They've been watching him for 6 months, and your documentation just gave them everything they needed to move. He'll be indicted within the week. Vincent settled into his chair and activated the wall display. 12 screens flickered to life, showing financial records, surveillance footage, communication intercepts, and real-time tracking data on 17 different targets across 3 states. And Claudia? Interesting question. Marcus pulled out a tablet and swiped through several documents. Legally, she's clean. She never signed anything related to Tyler's business, never received money directly from his fraudulent deals. She's just a woman who fell in love with a charming criminal. That's unfortunate. Vincent, Marcus's tone carried a warning. She's the mother of your son. She's a woman who spent 3 years poisoning my relationship with my child while living off the proceeds of fraud. Vincent's voice was matter of fact. She made her choice when she chose him over our family. Now she gets to live with the consequences. The main screen shifted to show a live feed from outside Claudia's house. Through the window, they could see her pacing frantically while Tyler sat on the couch with his head in his hands. "What's the plan?" Marcus asked. Vincent opened a secure laptop and began typing. Phase 1 was exposure. Phase 2 is escalation. Tyler's arrest will happen tomorrow morning. I want Claudia to understand exactly how deep she is in this. Meaning, her house is financed through Tyler's company. Her car lease, her country club membership, her credit cards. Everything she's used to maintain her lifestyle for the past 2 years has been funded by money that the federal government is about to seize. Marcus whistled low. She'll lose everything. Everything she gained by betraying our family. Vincent's fingers moved across the keyboard with surgical precision. But that's not the real punishment. On the screen, Vincent pulled up financial records showing a web of interconnected companies, shell corporations, and investment vehicles that would have impressed the most sophisticated money launderer. The real punishment is what happens to Ryan. Marcus set down his glass hard enough to make it ring against the table. Vincent, the boy is innocent in all this. Is he? Vincent turned to face his friend directly. Ryan chose his mother. He chose to believe I was weak and worthless. He chose to embrace Tyler as a father figure and celebrate his success. He made those choices as an adult. Marcus, 19, is old enough to understand loyalty. So what are you going to do? Vincent pulled up another screen showing Ryan's academic records, financial aid applications, and employment prospects. Ryan's graduate school funding was arranged through shell companies connected to Tyler's business empire. His summer internship at Morrison & Associates, the law firm that destroyed me in the divorce, was secured through Tyler's influence. Even his apartment lease was co-signed by one of Tyler's subsidiary companies. The implications hit Marcus immediately. When the feds seize Tyler's assets, Ryan loses everything. School funding, job prospects, even his apartment. He'll discover that everything he's gained since choosing his mother's side was built on fraud. That's brutal, even for you. Vincent stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city where his network of allies and assets stretched into every sector that mattered. You know what's brutal, Marcus? Having your own son look you in the eye and tell you that his mother's criminal boyfriend is a better man than you are. Being told you're worthless by a child you spent 15 years protecting and providing for. Behind him, the surveillance feed showed a black sedan pulling up to Claudia's house. 3 men in suits stepped out. Are those? Marcus began. FBI Financial Crimes Unit. They're serving search warrants for all of Tyler's properties and assets. Vincent checked his watch. Right on schedule. On the screen, they watched as Claudia answered the door, her face cycling through confusion, denial, and growing horror as she realized what was happening. Tyler appeared behind her, and even through the surveillance feed, his panic was visible. Vincent's secure phone buzzed with a text from Agent Romano. Webb is in custody. Clean sweep on all properties. Your intel was perfect. Phase 2 complete, Vincent said to Marcus. Tomorrow morning, Claudia wakes up homeless. Her bank accounts will be frozen, pending investigation into whether she knowingly benefited from criminal proceeds. Her social circle will abandon her the moment they realize she's associated with a federal fraud case. And Ryan? Ryan gets to learn what it feels like when the foundation of your life turns out to be built on lies. Vincent's reflection in the window showed no trace of regret. Maybe then he'll understand what he did to me. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying his oldest friend. What happens if he comes to you for help? Vincent turned back to the room, his expression unreadable. That depends entirely on what he's prepared to say about the choices he's made. On the surveillance feed, they watched as FBI agents began loading boxes of evidence from Claudia's house while she stood on the front lawn in her silk pajamas, Tyler's world collapsing around her in real time. Vincent Cross had built his network for moments like this, when betrayal demanded a response that legal courts couldn't provide. Tomorrow, everyone who had dismissed him as weak would begin to understand what real power looked like. The game was accelerating exactly as planned. Chapter 5. The collapse begins. Claudia Morrison hadn't slept. She stood in her kitchen at 6 a.m., surrounded by the remnants of what had been, just 24 hours ago, a life of comfortable luxury. FBI evidence boxes lined the hallway. Tyler's belongings had been seized along with anything that could be connected to his business empire. Her Mercedes was gone, impounded as part of the asset forfeiture. Even her jewelry box sat empty, its contents tagged and bagged as potential proceeds of criminal activity. Her phone had been ringing since 5 in the morning, but not with offers of support. Patricia Harrison, her divorce attorney, had called to inform her that the firm was terminating their relationship to avoid any potential conflicts of interest arising from ongoing federal investigations. Her personal banker had left a voicemail explaining that her accounts were under federal review and all assets were frozen pending the outcome of Tyler's case. Most devastating of all had been the call from Ryan. "Mom, what the hell is going on? I just got an eviction notice from my apartment. They're saying my co-signer is under federal investigation for fraud. My internship just called and rescinded their offer. Mom, what did Tyler do?" She tried to explain, but how do you tell your son that the man he'd looked up to for 2 years was a criminal? How do you admit that everything they'd built together was constructed on lies? The doorbell rang, and Claudia found herself hoping it was Vincent. As much as she hated to admit it, she needed someone who understood power and money and how to navigate the kind of disaster her life had become. Instead, she opened the door to find 2 people she'd never seen before. A woman in her 40s with sharp features and expensive clothes, and a younger man whose smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Morrison? I'm Sandra Phillips from Chicago Tribune, and this is my photographer, Dennis. We'd love to ask you a few questions about Tyler Webb's arrest and your relationship with the fraud investigation." Claudia slammed the door, but the damage was done. The media had found her. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Coffee? We need to talk." 20 minutes later, Claudia sat across from Vincent in a small cafe 3 blocks from what used to be her house. He looked exactly the same as always, calm, composed, completely unruffled by the chaos he'd unleashed. She wanted to hate him for that composure, but mostly she felt exhausted. "You destroyed my life," she said without preamble. "I revealed what your life actually was," Vincent corrected. "Everything you thought you had was stolen money, Claudia. The house, the cars, the lifestyle, all of it came from Tyler defrauding investors out of millions of dollars." "I didn't know." "You didn't want to know." Vincent stirred his coffee with mechanical precision. "For 2 years, you lived with a man who made more money than his legitimate business could possibly generate. You never asked questions because you liked the answers the money provided." Claudia felt tears starting, but she forced them back. "What do you want from me, Vincent? Why did you ask me here? I want you to understand something." Vincent leaned forward slightly. Yesterday was just the beginning. Tyler's arrest, the asset seizures, the media attention. That's nothing compared to what's coming. "What are you talking about?" Vincent pulled out his phone and showed her a news article dated that morning. Local developers' fraud scheme spans 3 states. Federal investigation reveals decades of financial crimes. Tyler didn't just defraud a few investors, Vincent continued. He's been running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme for 8 years. The FBI estimates total damages at over $40 million. Hundreds of families lost their retirement savings, their children's college funds, their homes. Claudia's hand shook as she read the article. "Vincent, I swear I didn't know. But you benefited." Vincent's voice was relentless. You lived in luxury while people lost everything. You attended charity galas funded by stolen money. You turned our son against me and taught him to respect a criminal. Ryan didn't know either. You can't punish him for, can I? Vincent's smile was razor thin. Ryan is an adult who made adult choices. He chose to see me as a failure and Tyler as a success. He chose to accept money, opportunities, and support from Tyler's criminal enterprise. Now, he gets to live with the consequences of those choices. Claudia's phone buzzed with another call from a reporter. She declined it and looked back at Vincent. What do you want? Money? Revenge? Tell me what it'll take to stop this. There is no stopping this. Vincent finished his coffee and stood. Tyler will spend the next 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Every asset he controlled will be liquidated to compensate his victims. Everyone who benefited from his crimes will be investigated, including me, including you. Vincent put on his coat with careful precision. The FBI will want to interview you extensively. They'll examine every transaction, every purchase, every dollar you spent for the past 2 years. If they determine you knowingly participated in or benefited from Tyler's crimes, you'll face charges. Claudia felt the walls closing in. Vincent, please. I know we had problems, but I'm still the mother of your child. Doesn't that mean anything? Vincent looked at her for a long moment, and for just a second, she thought she saw something soft in his expression. Then it hardened back into cold assessment. You stopped being the mother of my child when you chose to poison him against me. You became Tyler's partner when you chose his money over our family. He turned to leave, then paused. There's one thing you should know, Claudia. Tyler didn't just steal from strangers. Some of his early victims were people I cared about. People whose lives he destroyed long before he met you. What does that mean? Vincent's smile was winter cold. It means this was never just about our divorce. This was about justice. Tyler Webb destroyed families, and I've spent 3 years making sure he would pay for it. You just happened to choose the wrong side. As Vincent walked away, Claudia realized with growing horror that she'd never been collateral damage in his revenge against Tyler. She'd been part of the target from the beginning. Her phone rang again. This time, it was Ryan, and his voice was shaking with panic. Mom, I just got a call from the FBI. They want to interview me about Tyler's business. They're asking about gifts, payments, anything he might have given me. Mom, what am I supposed to tell them? Claudia closed her eyes and tried to find an answer that wouldn't destroy what was left of her son's life. But Vincent had been right about one thing. Tyler's money had touched everything they'd built together, and now it was all falling apart. The game was far from over. Chapter 6, The Son's Reckoning. Ryan Cross sat in the sterile FBI field office conference room, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Across from him, Agent Patricia Romano and Detective Frank Morrison had spread out a collection of documents that chronicled 2 years of his life in uncomfortable detail. Bank statements showing deposits from Tyler Webb Enterprises. Lease agreements co-signed by shell companies. Academic funding traced back to fraudulent investment schemes. Even his Northwestern graduation party had been paid for with stolen money. Mr. Cross, Agent Romano's voice was professional but not unkind. We want to be clear that you're not currently suspected of any criminal activity. We believe you were unaware of Mr. Webb's illegal operations. But Ryan's voice cracked slightly. But you did receive substantial financial benefits from those operations. Money that will need to be repaid to Mr. Webb's victims as part of the restitution process. Detective Morrison leaned forward. Ryan, can I call you Ryan? We're talking about approximately $68,000 in direct benefits over the past 2 years. Apartment deposits, tuition assistance, car payments, even some of your mother's household expenses that indirectly benefited you. Ryan felt sick. I didn't know. I swear to God, I thought Tyler was just successful. He said his business was booming, that he wanted to help because he cared about my future. We believe you, Agent Romano said. The question now is what happens next. Federal law requires that proceeds from criminal activity be returned to victims, regardless of whether the recipient knew the money was stolen. So I have to pay it back. Eventually, yes. The court will work out a payment plan based on your income and assets. But Ryan, there's something else we need to discuss. Agent Romano pulled out another file, this one thicker than the others. Your father, Vincent Cross. Tell us about your relationship with him. Ryan looked confused. My dad? What does he have to do with this? He's the one who provided us with the evidence that broke open Tyler Webb's operation. Financial records, communication intercepts, business transaction histories going back 8 years. Without your father's cooperation, Tyler Webb would still be operating. The room seemed to spin around Ryan. My dad? But he's just a security consultant. He sells alarm systems. Detective Morrison and Agent Romano exchanged a look. Son, your father runs one of the most sophisticated private intelligence gathering operations in the Midwest. He has connections in federal law enforcement, the judiciary, and financial oversight agencies that most Fortune 500 companies would kill for. That's impossible. My mom always said. Your mother said what your father allowed her to say. Agent Romano's tone was gentle but firm. Vincent Cross has been operating under deep cover for nearly 20 years. Very few people know the true extent of his capabilities. Ryan stared at the documents in front of him, trying to process what he was hearing. Are you saying my dad is like a spy or something? We're saying your father is a man who has spent decades building relationships with people who can get things done when the legal system moves too slowly. Detective Morrison tapped the files. Every piece of evidence we have against Tyler Webb came from your father's network. Bank records that should have taken months to obtain, communication intercept from sources we can't even identify, financial analysis that would have required teams of federal accountants. But why? Ryan's voice was barely above a whisper. Why would he go after Tyler? Why didn't he just tell me what Tyler really was? Agent Romano leaned back in her chair. Ryan, did you ever wonder why your father never fought the divorce settlement? Why he let your mother take half of everything without any real resistance? Ryan had wondered about that. His father's lawyer had been competent but not aggressive, and Vincent had seemed almost passive during the proceedings. Because he was already planning this, Ryan realized with growing horror. He knew about Tyler from the beginning. Tyler Webb's first major fraud was in 2019, Detective Morrison confirmed. He scammed a group of small investors out of their life savings to fund his initial real estate purchases. One of those investors was a woman named Margaret Santos. Agent Romano pulled out a photograph of an elderly Hispanic woman. Margaret Santos worked 2 jobs for 30 years to save money for her daughter's medical school. Tyler Webb convinced her to invest everything in a development project that never existed. She lost $180,000 and died of a heart attack 6 months later when the stress of bankruptcy became too much. Ryan felt physically sick. Oh God, Margaret Santos cleaned your father's office building for 12 years. Vincent Cross paid for her daughter's medical school after Margaret lost everything. He's been hunting Tyler Webb for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to destroy him completely. The room was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Ryan tried to reconcile this information with the father he thought he knew, the quiet, distant man who seemed to care more about work than family. My mom, does she know? Your mother chose to believe Tyler Webb over your father, Agent Romano said carefully. She chose to accept money and lifestyle improvements without asking where they came from. Your father gave her every opportunity to see Tyler for what he was. And me? Ryan's voice was hollow. What about me? Detective Morrison was blunt. You chose too, son. You chose to see your father as a failure and Tyler as a success. You chose to accept Tyler's support and turn your back on the man who raised you. Ryan put his head in his hands. I didn't know. Nobody told me. Your father assumed you'd figured out. He assumed the son he'd taught to think critically and investigate thoroughly would see through Tyler Webb's facade. Agent Romano's voice wasn't cruel, but it wasn't particularly sympathetic either. Instead, you chose the easy answer. Tyler was successful. Your father was boring. So Tyler must be the better man. The implications were crushing. Every conversation with his father over the past 2 years, every time Ryan had dismissed Vincent's concerns about Tyler, every family dinner where he'd bragged about Tyler's generosity while barely acknowledging his father's presence. Can I talk to him? My dad. Agent Romano checked her watch. He's actually here in the building. He's been briefing our financial crimes unit on the evidence package. Would you like us to ask if he's available? Ryan nodded, not trusting his voice. 20 minutes later, Vincent Cross entered the conference room. He looked exactly the same as always, calm, composed, completely in control. But now Ryan was seeing him with different eyes. "Hello, Ryan." "Dad." Ryan's voice cracked. "I'm so sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry. I didn't know what Tyler was, and I didn't know what you were, and I chose wrong about everything." Vincent sat down across from his son and studied him for a long moment. "What are you sorry for, specifically?" The question caught Ryan off guard. For believing Mom when she said you were just a workaholic who didn't care about family. For accepting Tyler's money. For treating you like you were less than him. "Those were choices you made as an adult," Vincent said quietly. "I'm not interested in apologies for poor judgment. I'm interested in whether you understand why those choices had consequences." Ryan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Because you taught me to think before I act, and I didn't. Because you taught me to question things that seemed too good to be true, and I didn't. Because I let other people think for me instead of using my own brain." Vincent nodded slightly. And because loyalty matters. Because family matters. Because when someone spends 15 years taking care of you, you don't throw them away the first time things get complicated. For the first time in the conversation, Vincent's expression softened just slightly. "What are you going to do now?" Ryan looked around the conference room, at the agents who'd spent the morning destroying his illusions, at the evidence of his father's true nature spread across the table. "I'm going to pay back every dollar Tyler stole, even if it takes me 20 years. I'm going to learn who my father really is instead of believing what other people told me. And I'm going to try to earn back something I should never have thrown away." Vincent stood up and walked to the door. Then he paused and looked back at his son. "There's a job opening in my organization for someone with a business degree and a hard lesson in the difference between appearance and reality. The pay is good, but the work is demanding and loyalty is non-negotiable." Ryan's head snapped up. "Dad, think about it. When you're ready to have that conversation, you know how to reach me." As Vincent left the room, Ryan realized that his father had just offered him something more valuable than Tyler Webb's stolen money, a chance to be part of something real. The question was whether he was strong enough to earn it. Chapter 7. The Final Players. 3 weeks after Tyler Webb's arrest, Vincent Cross stood in his private conference room, facing 7 people who represented the various factions still standing in the wreckage of his 3-year operation. The mahogany table reflected the soft glow of recessed lighting, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the Chicago skyline that had cost Vincent more than most people's houses. At one end of the table sat Judge Angela Romano, her federal robes replaced by a simple black dress that somehow made her more intimidating rather than less. Next to her was FBI agent Patricia Romano, no relation, despite the name, whose investigation had officially closed the Webb case, but opened several new avenues of inquiry. Across from them sat Marcus Delacroix, Vincent's oldest friend and the architect of much of the intelligence network that had made the Webb takedown possible. Beside Marcus was Detective Frank Morrison, whose cooperation had been essential to the operation's success. At the far end of the table sat 3 people who had not been invited but had demanded to be present: Claudia Morrison, her new attorney William Hayes, and Ryan Cross. Vincent had allowed this meeting because all the outstanding issues needed to be resolved before he could move forward with the next phase of his organization's evolution. With his cover blown, he could either retreat back into the shadows or step fully into the light as what he had always been, a man who operated outside normal legal channels to achieve results the system couldn't provide. "Let's be clear about why we're here," Vincent began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to controlling room dynamics. Tyler Webb is in federal custody, facing 15 to 20 years in prison. His Ponzi scheme has been dismantled, and the victim restitution process is underway. The primary operation is complete. Judge Romano leaned forward. "Vincent, the federal prosecutor wants to know if you're willing to testify about how you obtained some of the evidence against Webb. There are questions about surveillance methods and financial record access that could affect the strength of the case. The evidence will speak for itself. My methods remain confidential." Vincent's tone brooked no argument. Tyler Webb will plead guilty rather than face the full evidence package in open court. He knows what I have on him. Agent Romano consulted her notes. Speaking of evidence, we've been reviewing the scope of your intelligence gathering operation. Some of the techniques and capabilities you've demonstrated go well beyond what we'd expect from a private security consultant. Marcus spoke for the first time. Agent Romano, are you asking whether Vincent's organization operates within legal boundaries? I'm asking whether the federal government needs to be concerned about the existence of a private intelligence network operating without oversight. Vincent smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. Agent Romano, for 3 years, your agency struggled to build a case against Tyler Webb despite multiple complaints and suspicious activity reports. My organization handed you a complete evidence package that will result in the recovery of $40 million in stolen assets and justice for hundreds of victims. Perhaps the question isn't whether you should be concerned about my methods, but whether you should be embarrassed about your agency's failures. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Judge Romano cleared her throat diplomatically. Vincent has always been thorough in his approach to problem solving. I think we can all agree that the Webb case outcome justifies the methods used. Claudia had been silent throughout the exchange, but now she spoke up. What about my situation? I've been living in a motel for 3 weeks while the FBI decides whether to charge me with anything. My bank accounts are frozen. I can't access my own money, and reporters follow me everywhere I go. Her attorney, William Hayes, opened a file. My client has cooperated fully with the federal investigation. She's provided complete financial records, submitted to multiple interviews, and offered to repay any money that can be definitively traced to Tyler Webb's criminal activity. We believe the continued asset freeze is punitive rather than investigative. Vincent turned his attention to Claudia for the first time since the meeting began. Claudia, you lived with Tyler Webb for 2 years. You accepted gifts, vacations, and lifestyle improvements funded by money stolen from families like Margaret Santos. You chose not to question where that money came from because you liked the life it provided. I didn't know it was stolen. You didn't want to know. Vincent's voice was relentless. More importantly, you spent those 2 years poisoning our son against me while teaching him to admire a criminal. That wasn't a crime, Claudia, but it wasn't nothing. Ryan, who had been silent until now, looked up from his hands. Dad, Mom made mistakes, but she doesn't deserve to lose everything. She didn't commit any crimes. Vincent studied his son carefully. Over the past 3 weeks, Ryan had been working with the FBI to provide information about Tyler's operation, and he'd begun the process of repaying the money he'd unknowingly received from the fraud scheme. More importantly, he'd been asking questions about Vincent's real work, about the choices he'd made, about the man his father actually was rather than the man others had told him to see. Ryan, what do you think would be appropriate consequences for someone who chose to benefit from criminal activity, even unknowingly? Ryan was quiet for a long moment. Repayment of any money that came from illegal sources. Full cooperation with investigators. And acknowledgement that the choices made had serious consequences for other people. Vincent nodded approvingly. Agent Romano, I assume the federal government has reached similar conclusions about Claudia's situation? Mrs. Morrison will not face criminal charges. However, approximately $23,000 in direct benefits she received from Tyler Webb's criminal enterprise must be repaid as part of victim restitution. Her assets will remain frozen until a repayment plan is established. William Hayes looked relieved. That's acceptable. We can work out a payment schedule. There's one more issue, Vincent said, his gaze moving around the table. My organization has been operating in shadows for 20 years. The Webb case has brought us into the light in ways that require adjustments to our operational structure. Judge Romano looked concerned. What kind of adjustments? The kind that transform a private intelligence network into a legitimate consulting firm with government contracts and official oversight. Vincent activated the wall display, showing organizational charts and federal certification documents. Cross Strategic Solutions will become an official contractor for federal law enforcement agencies requiring specialized intelligence, gathering, and analysis services. Marcus grinned. In other words, we're going legitimate. As legitimate as we choose to be. Vincent's smile was sharp. Some clients require solutions that exist in legal gray areas. We'll continue to provide those services, but now we'll have official cover for the majority of our operations. Agent Romano studied the documents on the screen. This level of federal certification usually requires extensive background investigations and security clearances, which we've already obtained. Vincent's tone suggested that federal bureaucracy had never been a significant obstacle for his organization. Judge Romano has been facilitating the paperwork for 6 months. Claudia looked around the table, clearly struggling to understand the implications of what she was hearing. Vincent, are you saying you've been planning this transition since before Tyler's arrest? I've been planning this transition since the day our divorce was finalized. Vincent's voice was matter of fact. Tyler Webb was always going to be taken down. The only question was whether his destruction would serve a larger purpose. Ryan leaned forward. What larger purpose? Vincent looked at his son with something approaching pride. Creating an organization that can provide justice when a legal system moves too slowly or operates within constraints that protect the guilty. Tyler Webb destroyed families for years while hiding behind corporate structures and legal technicalities. He needed to face consequences that couldn't be delayed or plea bargained away. And now we have the resources and official recognition to take on bigger problems. Human traffickers who exploit legal loopholes. Corporate executives who poison communities and hide behind bankruptcy courts. Political corruption that operates just within the bounds of technical legality. Vincent stood and walked to the windows, looking out over the city where his network had operated in shadow for 2 decades. The Webb case was a proof of concept. We identified a criminal, gathered evidence through unconventional means, and delivered justice that the traditional legal system couldn't provide quickly enough. Now we can do that work openly, with federal sanction and unlimited resources. Marcus joined him at the window. And unlimited targets. Vincent's reflection in the glass showed a man who had spent 3 years waiting for this moment. Tyler Webb was small time. There are people out there destroying lives on a scale that makes his $40 million scheme look like petty theft. Now we can go after them. Behind them, the meeting was wrapping up with the efficiency of people who understood that the real business was conducted in private conversations after the formal proceedings ended. But Vincent was already thinking ahead to the next case, the next criminal who thought they were untouchable, the next family that needed justice delivered by people willing to operate outside normal constraints. The Cross organization was about to become something the criminal underworld had never faced before. A private army with federal backing and absolutely no interest in playing by rules that protected the guilty. Tyler Webb had been just the beginning. Chapter 8, The Confrontation. 6 months after Tyler Webb's sentencing to 18 years in federal prison, Vincent Cross received an unexpected visitor. Claudia had requested a meeting, but she hadn't come alone. Standing beside her in Vincent's office lobby was Tyler's younger brother, Derek Webb, whose expensive suit and aggressive posture suggested he hadn't come to offer condolences. Vincent's assistant, Maria Santos, Margaret Santos' daughter, whose medical school education Vincent had funded after Tyler's fraud destroyed her mother, announced the visitors with a carefully neutral tone. Vincent had hired Maria not out of charity, but because she understood better than most what Tyler Webb's crimes had cost real families. "Send them up," Vincent said into the intercom. "And Maria, activate the recording system." 5 minutes later, Vincent stood behind his desk as Claudia and Derek Webb entered his office. Claudia looked healthier than she had during the immediate aftermath of Tyler's arrest. 6 months of working as a real estate assistant had stripped away some of her entitled softness, and the simple clothes she wore suggested she was finally living within honest means. Derek Webb, on the other hand, looked like a man accustomed to getting what he wanted through intimidation. At 6'3", with the build of someone who worked out religiously, He carried himself with the casual aggression of a bully who'd never faced real consequences. "Vincent," Claudia said carefully, "thank you for seeing us. I know this is unusual. Unusual doesn't begin to cover it." Vincent remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. "Derek, I assume you're here about your brother's situation." Derek stepped forward, his jaw set in obvious anger. "I'm here because you destroyed my family with your vendetta bullshit. Tyler made some mistakes, sure, but 18 years? You ruined him because you couldn't handle your wife leaving you for a better man." Vincent's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Derek, your brother stole $43 million from families like Margaret Santos. He destroyed retirement funds, college savings, and medical treatment money. 18 years is actually quite lenient. That's bullshit, and you know it." Derek's voice was rising. "Tyler was a successful businessman who got caught up in some bad investments. You're the one who manufactured evidence and manipulated federal agencies because you're a pathetic loser who couldn't keep his wife happy." Claudia put a restraining hand on Derek's arm. "Derek, please. That's not why we're here." Vincent walked around his desk, moving with the controlled calm of a predator who wasn't threatened by the loud posturing of his visitors. "Actually, Claudia, I think Derek should finish his thought. What exactly do you think I did, Derek? I think you used your government connections to frame Tyler for crimes he didn't commit. I think you planted evidence and bribed investigators because you couldn't stand that Claudia chose him over you." Vincent smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. "That's an interesting theory. Would you like to see the evidence against your brother?" "I've seen the evidence. It's all circumstantial bullshit that could have been manufactured by anyone with the right connections." Vincent activated his wall display, and financial records began scrolling across multiple screens. Bank transfers, wire records, communication intercepts, and video surveillance footage filled the room with the overwhelming documentation of Tyler Webb's criminal enterprise. "Derek, this is just the first 10% of the evidence package. Would you like me to show you the communications where Tyler explicitly discusses defrauding elderly investors? The video surveillance of him lying to families about guaranteed returns? The recordings of him laughing about stupid old people who trusted him with their life savings?" Derek's confidence wavered as the scope of the evidence became clear. That could be faked. Technology today, you can fake anything. "You're right, Derek. Technology is remarkable." Vincent pressed another button, and the room filled with audio of Tyler's voice, crystal clear and unmistakably authentic. "The Santos woman is perfect, elderly, desperate, and stupid enough to believe anything I tell her about guaranteed returns. I'm going to take every penny she has, and she'll thank me for the opportunity." Claudia went pale. She'd heard pieces of the evidence during the federal investigation, but hearing Tyler's voice dismissing Margaret Santos as a target made her stomach turn. Derek was staring at the screens in shock. Tyler wouldn't. Your brother was a predator, Derek. He specifically targeted elderly immigrants, widows, and blue-collar families because he knew they'd be less likely to have sophisticated legal representation when he stole their money. Vincent activated another display showing photographs of Tyler's victims. Elderly faces, middle-aged couples, young families, dozens of people whose lives had been destroyed by the man Derek was defending. Margaret Santos died of a heart attack 6 months after Tyler stole her life savings. Harold Martinez lost his house and had to move in with his daughter after Tyler took his retirement fund. The Wilson family couldn't afford their son's cancer treatment after Tyler convinced them to invest their insurance settlement in a development project that never existed. Derek sank into a chair, the fight going out of him as he processed the scope of his brother's crimes. "I didn't know. Tyler said it was all just business disputes, that the charges were trumped up. Your brother was looking at 47 separate federal charges when he accepted the plea agreement. 18 years was a gift." Claudia spoke for the first time since the presentation began. "Vincent, Derek isn't here to defend Tyler. He's here because he's in trouble too." Vincent turned his attention back to Derek, who was still staring at the victim photographs. "What kind of trouble?" Derek looked up with hollow eyes. "The FBI says I might have unknowingly received proceeds from Tyler's crimes." Money he gave me for my restaurant, loans he co-signed, business investments we did together. They want me to repay almost $200,000, but I don't have it. The restaurant barely breaks even, and everything else is mortgaged. And you came to me because Claudia said you might be willing to work out some kind of arrangement, that maybe we could find a way to resolve this without destroying my business. Vincent walked back to his desk and sat down, studying Derek with the clinical interest of an entomologist examining an interesting specimen. Derek, you spent the first 10 minutes of this meeting accusing me of framing your brother and manufacturing evidence. Now you want my help avoiding the consequences of benefiting from his crimes. Do you see the contradiction? Derek's face flushed red. Look, I was wrong about Tyler. I can see that now. But I didn't know what he was doing, and I can't pay back money I don't have. What can you pay? Derek looked confused. What? If the full amount is $200,000, what can you realistically pay without destroying your business? Maybe $50,000 over 5 years? If business stays steady and I don't have any major expenses. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled as he considered options. There might be a way to structure a payment plan that satisfies the federal restitution requirements without destroying your restaurant. Derek's head snapped up. Really? You'd help me even after what I said? I'd help Tyler's victims recover as much as possible from the people who benefited from his crimes. Your restaurant employs 12 people, Derek. Destroying it doesn't serve anyone's interests. Vincent pulled out a legal pad and began writing. However, my assistance would come with conditions. What kind of conditions? First, you make a public statement acknowledging that your brother was guilty of every charge against him and expressing genuine remorse for the harm he caused. Second, you cooperate fully with any future investigations into Tyler's associates and business partners. Third, you provide information about anyone who might have knowingly participated in or benefited from his fraud scheme. Derek nodded eagerly. Yes, absolutely. Whatever you need. And fourth, Vincent's voice became very quiet. You apologize to Margaret Santos' daughter for defending the man who killed her mother. Derek looked confused. Margaret Santos' daughter? I don't understand. Vincent pressed the intercom button. Maria, could you join us, please? Maria Santos entered the office with the composed dignity she'd inherited from her mother. At 28, she had graduated medical school with honors and was completing her residency in family medicine. She looked at Derek Webb with the steady gaze of someone who understood exactly what his brother had cost her family. Derek, Vincent said quietly, this is Dr. Maria Santos. Her mother, Margaret, worked 2 jobs for 30 years to save money for Maria's medical education. Tyler stole every penny of it and laughed about how easy it was to defraud a stupid old woman. Margaret died of a heart attack 6 months later when the financial stress became too much. Derek's face went ashen as the abstract concept of victims suddenly became personal. Oh God, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Maria's voice was steady, but carried an undertone of pain that 6 months hadn't healed. Mr. Webb, your brother didn't just steal money. He stole my mother's dignity, her sense of security, and ultimately her life. She died believing she'd failed me, that she'd been foolish to trust someone who seemed so successful and confident. I'm sorry, Derek whispered. I'm so goddamn sorry. If I'd known what Tyler was really doing, you would have stopped him? Maria's question was gentle but pointed. Or would you have found ways to rationalize it as long as you were benefiting too? Derek had no answer to that, and the silence stretched until Vincent broke it. Derek, the payment plan I'm willing to arrange will allow you to keep your restaurant and make restitution over 10 years instead of 5. In exchange, you'll spend 1 day every month for the next 2 years working at a nonprofit organization that helps elderly victims of financial fraud. You'll see firsthand what your brother's crimes cost real families. And Maria will oversee your community service, Vincent continued. She'll determine whether you're genuinely committed to making amends or just going through the motions to avoid consequences. Derek looked at Maria, then back at Vincent. That's more than fair. Thank you. Vincent stood, signaling that the meeting was over. Derek, understand something. This is your one chance to do the right thing. If you fail to meet any of the conditions we've discussed, if you miss payments or try to avoid your obligations, there won't be any negotiations or second chances. I understand. I hope you do. Vincent's voice carried the quiet menace of a man who had spent decades proving that actions had consequences. Because Tyler thought he was too smart to get caught and too charming to face real consequences. He was wrong about both things. As Derek and Claudia left the office, Maria remained behind. "Mr. Cross, do you think he's sincere?" Vincent watched Derek through the window as he walked to his car, his shoulders bent with the weight of new understanding. "I think he's scared, which is almost as good as sincere." "And Maria? If he doesn't live up to the agreement, we'll destroy him just as thoroughly as we destroyed his brother." "And if he does?" Vincent smiled for the first time since the meeting began. "Then maybe one good thing will come out of Tyler Webb's crimes. Derek will learn what his brother never did, that some debts can only be paid through genuine service to the people you've harmed." Through the window, they watched Derek Webb drive away to begin a very different kind of life than the one he'd expected when he came to confront Vincent Cross. The Webb family's reckoning was finally complete. Chapter 9. The New Order. 1 year after Tyler Webb began serving his federal sentence, Vincent Cross stood before the largest gathering of his network that had ever taken place in a single location. The abandoned warehouse in South Chicago had been transformed into a sophisticated command center, with multiple screens displaying real-time intelligence feeds from 6 different states and communication links to federal agencies, local law enforcement, and private contractors across the country. 57 people filled the converted space: former federal agents, retired military officers, financial analysts, technology specialists, and legal advisors who had spent years working in the shadows of Vincent's organization. Tonight, for the first time, they were all in the same room, preparing to emerge fully into the light as Cross Strategic Solutions became the most powerful private intelligence firm in North America. Vincent had spent the years since Tyler's arrest carefully orchestrating this transition. Federal contracts worth $37 million had been secured. Partnerships with major corporations, law enforcement agencies, and government departments have been formalized. Most importantly, the organization's reputation for delivering results that traditional legal channels couldn't provide had attracted clients whose problems required solutions operating in carefully defined gray areas. Marcus Delacroix stood at Vincent's right hand, his role as operational director now official rather than clandestine. To Vincent's left stood Judge Angela Romano, whose federal connections had been instrumental in legitimizing the organization's more questionable intelligence-gathering methods. But the person Vincent was most focused on stood near the back of the group, taking notes with the intensity of someone who understood they were witnessing history. Ryan Cross had spent the past year earning his place in his father's organization through 12-hour days, dangerous fieldwork, and a demonstrated commitment to the principles that defined Cross Strategic Solutions: loyalty, thoroughness, and the understanding that some forms of justice couldn't wait for legal systems to catch up. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vincent began, his voice carrying easily through the converted warehouse. "For 20 years, this organization has operated on the principle that evil prospers when good people are constrained by rules that protect the guilty. Tonight, we stop hiding what we are." The screens around the room shifted to display a map of North America marked with dozens of red indicators. Each marker represented an active case: human trafficking networks, corporate executives poisoning communities, political corruption that existed just within legal boundaries, financial predators targeting vulnerable populations. Cross Strategic Solutions will be what Tyler Webb never expected to face: an organization with unlimited resources, federal backing, and absolutely no interest in playing by rules designed to protect criminals from consequences. Agent Patricia Romano, whose FBI liaison role had evolved into something resembling a permanent partnership, stepped forward. "Vincent, the federal government is prepared to provide unprecedented cooperation for operations targeting crimes that traditional law enforcement struggles to prosecute effectively." Judge Romano added, "The judicial system will fast-track warrants and legal proceedings for cases originating from Cross Strategic Solutions intelligence." We've learned that sometimes justice delayed is justice denied. Vincent activated another display showing financial projections and operational capabilities. We currently have the resources to maintain 47 simultaneous investigations, with analysis teams capable of processing intelligence faster than most federal agencies. Our technology division has developed surveillance and financial tracking capabilities that exceed anything available to traditional law enforcement. Marcus grinned as he pointed to a section of the display showing international partnerships. And we're not limited by jurisdictional boundaries. When criminals operate across state or national lines, we can coordinate responses that individual agencies can't match. Ryan stepped forward from the back of the group. Over the past year, he transformed from a confused college graduate into a focused operative who understood both the capabilities and the responsibilities of the organization he was joining. Dad, what about accountability? If we're operating with this much power and freedom, how do we make sure we don't become what we're fighting against? The question drew approving nods from several team members, and Vincent felt a surge of pride at his son's development. Ryan, that's exactly the right question. Marcus activated a final display showing oversight mechanisms and ethical guidelines. Every operation requires approval from a review board that includes federal representatives, legal advisors, and community advocates. Every target must meet specific criteria for harm caused and likelihood of escaping traditional prosecution. And every team member undergoes psychological evaluation every 6 months to ensure the work isn't corrupting our judgment. Most importantly, Vincent continued, we operate with complete transparency to our oversight partners. Judge Romano reviews all surveillance requests. Agent Romano coordinates with federal prosecutors to ensure our intelligence gathering supports rather than undermines official investigations. And our financial analysts document every dollar spent to prevent the kind of corruption that destroyed Tyler Webb. Dr. Maria Santos, whose role had evolved from assistant to community liaison, spoke from her position near the front of the group. Mr. Cross, what about the families we serve? How do we make sure victims' voices are heard in the process? Vincent smiled at the question that demonstrated exactly why Maria had become indispensable to the organization's mission. Maria, you'll be leading our victim advocacy division. Every case will include representatives of the affected communities, and every resolution will prioritize restitution and support for the people who were harmed. The warehouse fell silent as the team absorbed the scope of what they were building. This wasn't just a private investigation firm or a security consulting company. This was something unprecedented, a private organization with federal backing designed to deliver justice that traditional systems couldn't provide. Our first major case under the new structure, Vincent announced, involves a pharmaceutical company that's been knowingly selling contaminated medications to low-income communities. The FDA has been investigating for 3 years, but corporate lawyers have delayed any meaningful action through regulatory challenges and political pressure. Agent Romano nodded grimly. Traditional prosecution would take another 2 years minimum, during which hundreds of people will receive medications that could cause permanent health damage. Cross-strategic solutions will resolve this case in 6 weeks, Vincent stated with quiet confidence. We'll provide complete documentation of corporate malfeasance, trace the financial incentives that drove the decision to prioritize profits over public health, and coordinate with federal agencies to ensure the responsible executives face both criminal charges and personal financial liability. Marcus added, and we'll do it in ways that traditional law enforcement can't, by operating simultaneously across multiple jurisdictions, by accessing financial records through private networks that bypass corporate legal delays, and by building cases that corporate lawyers can't challenge on procedural grounds. Ryan raised his hand. What happens to the executives responsible? Vincent's smile was sharp as winter steel. The same thing that happened to Tyler Webb. They'll face consequences they never thought were possible, delivered by people they never knew existed. As the meeting concluded and team members began dispersing to their new assignments, Vincent stood with Marcus and Ryan, watching the screens that displayed their growing network of operations across the continent. You know, Marcus said thoughtfully, Tyler Webb probably thought he was just stealing money from some old lady when he targeted Margaret Santos. He had no idea he was starting a war with someone who had been planning for this moment for 20 years. Ryan looked at his father with the respect that had taken a year of hard lessons to develop. "Dad, do you ever wonder if we're going too far? If maybe Tyler's 18 years in prison was enough revenge?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment, watching intelligence feeds from operations that would deliver justice to families Tyler Webb had never heard of, who had been harmed by criminals he'd never met. "Ryan, revenge was never the point. Tyler Webb was just one criminal in a system that protects the guilty and abandons the innocent. What we built from his destruction is something that can prevent 1,000 other Tyler Webbs from destroying families like Margaret Santos." Vincent turned from the screens to face his son directly. "The question isn't whether we're going too far. The question is whether we're going far enough to make sure that people who prey on the vulnerable understand that somewhere out there, someone is watching, someone is planning, and someone will make sure their crimes have consequences." Outside the warehouse, the Chicago skyline glittered with the lights of 8 million people, most of whom would never know that an organization existed whose sole purpose was ensuring that the powerful couldn't escape justice by hiding behind wealth, influence, or legal technicalities. Vincent Cross had started his war against Tyler Webb with a single phone call at his son's graduation. Now, 1 year later, he commanded an army that would make criminals across the continent understand a simple truth: actions have consequences, and some debts can only be paid in full. The Cross organization had become exactly what Vincent had always intended: a force that criminals could neither predict, nor understand, nor escape. And Tyler Webb, serving 18 years in federal prison, would spend every day of his sentence knowing that his destruction had been just the beginning of something much larger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined possible. Justice, Vincent had learned, was not just about punishment. It was about building systems that ensured punishment was inevitable, inescapable, and precisely calibrated to the harm that had been caused. The game was no longer just one. The game had been fundamentally changed forever. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.